de obicei, și anume un intro spre marea bucurie a lui Mugut. Nu pentru că mi-am pregătit un intro, ci pentru că am așa de mari emoții încât trebuie să spun ceva înainte ca să pară că n-am. S-a întâmplat să primesc cartea lui Viet Thanh Nguyen. Is that correct?
Yes.
That was so good for me. Cândva în anul 2020 scrie pe prima pagină și am început să o citesc cu mare curiozitate și m-am oprit după câteva pagini dintr-un motiv foarte simplu și anume n-are linii de dialog. Iar eu am o problemă cu asta, dar nu o să-i spun lui, o să afle mai târziu. Și am pus-o deoparte. Și a stat deoparte, cred că vreo jumătate de ani, până când am avut curaj să mă întorc la ea, pentru că aveam foarte mulți oameni pe lângă mine care vorbeau despre cartea asta. Și am zis, probabil că merită mai multă atenție decât am avut eu la început, drept care am pus mâna pe ea și culmea e că nu i-am mai dat drum. Nu doar că am citit-o în 2020 când a ajuns la mine, ci am recitit-o pentru interviul ăsta și mi-a plăcut cel puțin la fel de mult ca prima oară. Și cred că după ce m-am uitat la câteva interviuri cu Viet, care a fost atât de drăguț încât am voie să-i spun pe numele mic pentru că are un nume foarte complicat, mi-am dorit să știu mai multe, nu doar despre carte, ci și despre autor, așa că astăzi în România, promovând continuarea simpatizantului și anume devotatul, iar fetele de la editura Arta au fost atât de drăguțe încât să ne intermedieze această discuție și iată-ne astăzi aici, de Ziua Internațională a Sărutului. Mi-a zis Mugur că trebuie să vă spun că e Ziua Internațională a Sărutului și că, sincer să fiu, ne-am și pupat la intrare, cu Viet Thanh Nguyen, talking about your books, talking about your life as a writer, talking about you in Romania. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Liv.
How is Romania so far?
Oh, it's been amazing. It's my first time in Romania, first time in Eastern Europe at all. Okay. So I'm quite impressed by what I've seen.
You came in yesterday, I
yes,
guess?
I did.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be a long day for you, so I'll keep it short. But how short can you keep it with your books? It's not that simple. How was the Sympathizer born?
The Sympathizer was born because my agent told me I needed to write a novel after I'd written my short story collections, and I'd always wanted to write a novel. I just never had the right idea and the right circumstances in my life. I'd spent 17 years writing the Refugees, my short story collection at that point, and it had been a struggle the entire time. So when it came time to writing the novel, what really surprised me was how easy it was. So it took me 2 years to write The Sympathizer, 2 years of almost pure joy. And I think partly what happened was that the 17 years I'd spent trying to learn how to write fiction with the Refugees paid off, and all of a sudden I found out I could write a novel, despite never having done it before. And I also had complete freedom to do what I wanted. Nobody knew who I was, no one bothered me, so no pressure, just my life. Yeah, but 2 years, and since I had nothing else to do, the novel just poured out of me after I found the right voice and the right character for the novel.
Well, it's not an autobiographical novel, actually, but it's based on your life, most of it.
Well, yes, I mean, the character of the Sympathizer, our narrator, is an alcoholic, a womanizer, a spy, a liar, a traitor, a murderer. How do you know? If I was actually any good at those things, you wouldn't know about that. But it's not autobiographical in that sense, factually. But, it is a novel born from much of my thinking about the history that shaped my family and myself, which is the history of French colonization, the American war in Vietnam, becoming refugees. And emotionally and intellectually, I think the novel is rather autobiographical because many of the things that the Sympathizer thinks and feels are things that I've thought and felt, but perhaps have been too polite to say out loud.
You also I don't think you don't like to be called a voice, a representative voice for your minority. You actually said, I see things from both perspectives. So what kind of an author are you? Are you an American author, a Vietnamese author?
I think I'm whatever anybody wants to call me. I'm a Vietnamese American writer, Asian American writer, refugee writer, American writer. Apparently here and in France, I'm classified as Anglo-Saxon writer. I'm also just a writer. I think so much of it depends on context. So for example, I've sat next to Jonathan Franzen at a conversation. If Jonathan Franzen is introduced as a writer and I'm introduced as a Vietnamese American writer, then I find that offensive. If Jonathan is a writer, then I'm a writer. It's either adjectives for everybody or adjectives for nobody.
That's correct.
So I'm fine with adjectives as long as Jonathan Franzen is called the white male American writer. That's perfectly fine. So I think the issue of identity is very contextual, and I refuse none of them. And for me, given my experiences growing up in the United States, with the legacies of the war, with racism, with the particular way that identity and race are dealt with in the United States, I don't shy away from those things. And so my writing, I think, is writing without adjectives, but also writing with adjectives as well.
That theme of identity is actually the greatest theme of your work, but I don't feel the bitterness in this. Actually, you can find this, I don't know, a soft voice for it. How can you manage that?
I think there is anger and rage in the novel, but I hope you're right that there's no bitterness. I don't know if bitterness can ever be a good emotion, but I think anger and rage in a certain quantity can be very helpful, as long as it's also eventually mixed in with some other kinds of emotions. So this book has a lot of anger and rage, as I think anybody who has been subjected to colonialism or occupation or racism should feel. But there's also a lot of satire and humor and a lot of melancholy and a lot of self-reflection in the novel. And I think that's what makes hopefully the anger and the rage much easier to swallow for many readers, not all readers, but for many readers. Because whenever he's angry, he's also angry at himself. And he's also capable of seeing the absurdities and the tragedies of the situations that he finds himself in. And he can always make a joke that hopefully we can laugh along with as well.
However, you used to say that your friends never thought of you as a funny person before. What happened?
Yeah, my parents are very devout Catholics, and I was raised as a very devout in a very devout way. And my family was also a very hard-working family. We don't know how to have fun. So I spent my entire life being a very repressed, hard-working, very disciplined Catholic. But inside of me, I think there was always this other voice. The character of this novel describes himself as a man of two faces and two minds, and I think that is also very true for me. And I was able to repress one half of myself for a very long time until I wrote the novel, and then all the other aspects of me came out in the writing of this book.
I was watching one of your interviews last night, and you were talking about the way that your parents never told you I love you. We have a lot of things in common with the Romanian culture. We also don't say I love you, we just show it. And I don't know, does things changed?
Yeah, I think that my mother passed away, but my father is 89, almost 90, and my brother and I have said to him many times over the last 10 or 15 years, I love you. And now he says, I love you back, in two languages, Vietnamese and English. So we feel that things can change. And there's probably nothing wrong with being in a culture that doesn't say I love you, as long as everybody understands that. But again, if you grow up as an immigrant or refugee in the United States, you come from a culture that doesn't say I love you. And then in the United States, it is a culture that people like to say I love you.
It's a common thing.
Yeah, in public. And so you feel, I felt as if, and many people like me felt as if we were missing something from our family and our parents. And so things have changed with my own children. I was terrified of having children because I don't know how to love people.
You have a son?
I have a son and a daughter.
And a daughter.
Yeah, and I say I love them to you all the time, and they say I love you back. And I think that it was a very conscious effort on my part to be able to do that. And in many ways, I think being a writer has been important for me. to learn how to express emotions, and vice versa. Being a parent has made me a better writer as well, because I've been able to deal with emotions that I never thought I would have to feel.
Talking about writing, we have a lot of wannabe writers in our community. Can you tell us a bit about your routine as a writer?
The routine just varies, and so the one thing I would say is that I think to be a writer, you have to read a lot and you have to write a lot. That's it. You can do everything else you want to do, but nothing else really, I think, makes as much of a difference as that. Can you put in 10,000 hours of reading? Can you put in 10,000 hours of writing? If you can, you will be a writer. Doesn't mean that you will be a good writer or a published writer, but you will be a writer. Because I think for me, so much about being a writer is about the discipline and about the sense of being called to be a writer. So I think there is something very spiritual about being a writer, and everything spiritual requires sacrifice and discipline, no matter what it is. So it doesn't matter when it comes to routine, whether you write every day. I know some writers say you have to write every day, but I don't think that matters. I think what matters is if it takes 10,000 hours of writing to be a writer, you have to do that. You could do it in 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, but you have to do that. And so in the case of my own life, I did 17 years of writing The Refugees. I did that whenever I had free time, because I was a teacher, I am a professor, and I am a husband, so I have other people I have to worry about. And then I became a father. But The Sympathizer was a really wonderful writing experience, because this was right before I became a father, and I didn't have to teach. So I had 2 years, and that was the ideal routine, where I wrote 4 hours a day, made lunch, ran. All these ideas came to me when I was running, and then I was ready to start writing the next day. That to me is an ideal routine.
So running helps?
Oh yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
So that's for Murakami.
I think that I'm trying to remember whether I read the Murakami book, what we talk about when we talk about running, before or after The Sympathizer. But that's a really powerful book, because for him, I think running is important as a discipline, but it's a metaphor, obviously, for writing as well. And I do not want to be Murakami in any way. 20, I'm not. So, but 26 miles. He likes to run marathons, and 7 miles a day. I only ran about 2 to 6 miles a day, depending. But that was enough. I mean, I would run until the ideas. Well, no, I think anybody can do it. I think that I ran enough until I started to get very excited, and the ideas would come for the next day.
Talking about reading, what do you read?
I have to confess now that I also listen to a lot of books. So I think 1/2 to 2/3 of my reading is actually listening to books. And what is it? What have I read recently that's been good? Well, I also read for the Pulitzer Prizes in the United States. I'm on the board that gives out the Pulitzer Prizes. So it was a real pleasure to read the 2 Pulitzer-winning novels this year, Trust by Hernan Diaz and Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. They're very different novels. Okay. So Demon Copperhead is a rewriting, an adaptation of Charles Dickens's David Copperfield, but in the landscape of poor white people in the Appalachian Mountains of the United States. It's very much a 19th century novel adapted for the present, whereas Trust by Hernan Diaz is 4 different stories, all about the same characters, and it's about both men and women and Me Too, but also about the history of finance. Okay. It's fascinating, and it's much more of a 21st century postmodern novel. So, I think we in the Pulitzer Prize thought both of these were equally good. What should we do? So I think for the first time in our history, we gave 2 Pulitzer Prizes in the same year. So I recommend these 2 books very much. I'm way behind, but I just listened to Ottessa Moshfegh for the first time. Her book, Eileen, really amazing, gripping novel as well. So all 3 of those recently I have read.
That sounds great. About you being in the board of the Pulitzer Prize, as a writer, how hard it is for you to judge, to evaluate other people's work?
It's very easy.
Really?
I think writers are very judgmental.
That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, but it's not simply that I have a judgment, but there are 17 or 18 of us on the Pulitzer Prize board, so everybody has an opinion, we have long discussions and so on. And what's interesting for me is that I mentioned before that you should spend 10,000 hours reading. Well, I think you should read widely, and then you should read deeply. And I do both, but generally I was reading very widely in fiction. and very deeply in certain genres of fiction. But for the Pulitzer Prizes, we actually have to read everything. So not just fiction, but nonfiction, poetry, history, biography, autobiography, and a dozen different categories of journalism and music and so on. It's a lot. So it's really been interesting because it's forced me to broaden my horizons and read across things that I've never read before. And it's been a learning experience. So you asked how's it like to make judgments as a writer. On fiction, I have very strong opinions, but it's very educational for me to listen to my fellow editors and journalists and so on discuss both the fiction, but then also all these other categories of writing that I'm not expert in. And so I feel for me as a writer, yes, I want to render judgment and criticism, but I also feel humbled because I think there's so much more for me to learn and hopefully incorporate some of the things I'm learning into my fiction.
So we're speaking with a community of readers. So what's your relationship with your readers?
With my readers? Well, I love my readers. However, I will say that when I was writing The Refugees, I felt that I was writing these stories for myself, but I was also very conscious of readers. I was conscious of The Refugees is a short story collection about Vietnamese refugees, so I was worried about what Vietnamese readers would think, what my parents would think, what reviewers and agents and editors would think. Would I get any prizes? Would I be published? And I think those are very human impulses and weaknesses. But when I wrote The Sympathizer, I felt I just spent 17 years writing this book, partly thinking about my readers. When I wrote The Sympathizer, I thought, I'm not going to worry about my readers, whoever that may be. I'm going to write this book for myself, first and foremost. And that was actually very liberating. Because I think that, of course, I love my readers, but...
They love you too.
Thank you. Some of them don't, but that's okay. But I think that if I were to write for myself first, I think the act of trust that I'm engaging in is that there are other people like me out there, and that if I write for myself, the book will find my most ideal readers, and that seems to have happened. And I think I've heard this from other writers. They reach that point too, where they only write for themselves. I think it's a very difficult psychological and aesthetic breakthrough to have, because again, we're human beings and some of us want to be read by other people for many different kinds of reasons. So it's actually kind of challenging to get to the moment where you, of course, want readers, but first and foremost, I want to write for myself.
Mm-hmm. How about the third part of the trilogy? It's going to be a trilogy. Are you working on it already, or?
So The Sympathizer is the first novel. The second novel is The Committed. It takes place in France because of French colonization in Vietnam, and my narrator, The Sympathizer, has a French father, a priest. And once I started to write the second novel, I knew the Sympathizer would have to be a trilogy. There had to be a third and final novel. And
so you thought about it as a trilogy from the beginning?
No, I thought about it as one novel from the beginning. But when I finished writing The Sympathizer, I thought, there's more to be said about this character and his story, and about all the issues that he's involved with. So there will be a third novel, but it will be the last novel. There will be no more. Thank God, because it's a long time to spend with one other person. He's a very interesting person, I think, but he's also a challenging person to spend time with for me personally. So that will be the third and final novel, and he will, I think, return to the Americas.
Okay.
And then we will see what happens to him.
Good. I haven't finished The Committed yet, but 150 pages in the plane. But I found a name here, and I like for you to tell us what do you think about it. Eugen Ionescu, it's a Romanian writer. What do you know about Romanian literature? And does it, left a mark on you?
That is a very good question that I should have prepared myself for. So I'm sorry, no, I do not know that much about Romanian literature.
Okay.
Yeah.
We don't know that much about Vietnamese literature. Yeah. Actually, we had another Vietnamese author in one of our challenges. We read Ocean Vuong.
Mm-hmm.
Ocean Vuong, is that correct? But I don't know, for me to discover Sympathizer and The Committed was such a revelation. And I thank you so much for both of them. But I also thank you for your short stories, which are my favorite actually. Can you tell us a bit about your stories?
Well, I think a little bit more about the Romanian question and about Ocean, who's a lovely person. You know, I think that for me, what I always have thought about is Milan Kundra's essay about small nations versus large nations and the literatures that they write and how they can be very different. Because I think it means one thing to come from Romania or Vietnam and you think about, of course, if you're Romanian or Vietnamese, you have your own universe. But on the global stage, we're both smaller countries. And our literatures are not necessarily known outside of our countries. And for me, there's a sense in which that sense of being small is reinforced by the fact that in the United States, not only am I Vietnamese, but I'm also a Vietnamese American, so I'm a minority within the United States. And the argument that Kundra makes is that this makes a huge difference, whether one thinks of oneself as belonging to a large country or a small country when it comes to writing. And so what does it mean for me to be doubly small, but writing in English in a very large country, the United States? And when you are from a very large country, you can assume, or you think you assume, that everybody knows about you.
Yeah.
If you're French, Russian, Spanish, English, American, these are imperial literatures and imperial languages that everyone has to know. And so for me, that's a very ambivalent relationship, because if I was a Vietnamese writer writing in Vietnamese, I don't know if anybody outside of Vietnam would be reading me. But I am a Vietnamese American writer writing in English in the United States, and that has meant that my books have been able to be translated in many different languages. So I take very seriously what you're bringing up with your Romanian question, that the sense of the minor is not for me a sense of inferiority. The sense of the minor, for me, I mean, there is sometimes a sense of inferiority, but it has to be overcome. Because why am I inferior? Why am I small? How is that related to the history of imperialism and colonialism and all of that? That's where the anger and the rage from the sympathizer comes from. But The Refugees was written as I was trying to work through partly these questions of what it means to be a so-called minor writer, writing about so-called minor people. And so the stories are very intimate. They're small.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that they're not important. They're just very small because they focus on families, small stories, individuals. But hopefully in those so-called small stories, readers who are Romanian, for example, who know nothing about Vietnam or the Vietnamese war or the Vietnamese refugee experience, can find a resonance with love, conflict, longing, parents and children, displacement, tragic histories. All of that is in this book, but articulated in a very domestic way, whereas The Sympathizer and The Committed are grandly political novels on these large historical landscapes.
How can you avoid stereotypes when it comes to your culture in writing?
I think that one thing that I had to come to grips with is that when you are minor, you may feel a lot of anxiety around your supposed inferiority. So you might feel as if you need to translate yourself to be understood by the majority, whether it's the majority in your country or whether it's the entire world. This idea that people don't know anything about you or your people, therefore you have to explain. Never do that.
Okay.
Never do that. If you are writing a travel book, yes. If you're writing a history, yes. If you're writing fiction or poetry, never explain. I go back to, for example, the Jonathan Franzen example. Nothing personal about Jonathan, but I don't think Jonathan. But I don't think a writer like Jonathan Franzen ever worries about having to explain himself
That's true.
or St. Louis, Missouri, or America to the rest of the world. He simply assumes, I'm going to write about this, and everybody will know about it. That is what we all must do. And I think that is, for me, the strategy behind all of these books. I do not disavow being Vietnamese or being minor, but I will write about this history, these experiences, these peoples, as if I am a major writer. I will explain and translate nothing. And if readers have difficulties, that is their problem. For example, if I were to read Romanian literature, I would not expect the Romanian writer to translate or explain, because it would be absurd. If you are a Romanian writer writing to a Romanian audience, you do not explain. You assume everybody knows what you're talking about. That is exactly what we must all do. And I think if we do that, then we have the potential to write something that resonates universally. Whereas if we explain ourselves, we're already foregrounding our weaknesses as so-called minor peoples relative to these imperial powers and imperial writers who take it for granted that everyone will know who they are.
That's true. You did that with your children's book also?
Of course. And that book, Chicken of the Sea, was written by my son Ellison, when he was 5 years of age. And he wrote it out of pure joy and creativity, not thinking about readers or audiences or books or anything like that. And I think that I did that too when I was his age. And then something funny happens to us as we grow older. We become adults, and we learn rules, and we learn that there are certain things we have to do or that we can't do. And that's important, obviously. But that's also not creative. And so I think when I spoke earlier about writing only for myself, I think there's also an element of being like a child, of reclaiming that childlike spirit of creativity where you do whatever you want to do, and it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks.
Not taking yourself seriously.
Not taking yourself seriously. That's very important. I think writers, we should take our work seriously, but we shouldn't take ourselves seriously. That's a kiss of death, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
But if we can take our work seriously but not take ourselves seriously, maybe we have greater potential to tap into that childlike spirit within ourselves. If we take ourselves too seriously, then we think, oh, I can't be like a child, I know all these rules and so on. And so for me, the more writing I've done, the more it's been important for me to try to claim that spirit of refusing to respect anybody's rules or conventions.
You talk the importance of culture, and the importance of letting yourself being creative. Being a writer, it's a great responsibility, isn't it? For your culture, for your family, for yourself, I guess. How can we understand this kind of responsibility?
We as in writers,
We as in
audiences.
We as in readers.
Well, that's a very hard question, because I think that we spoke a little bit earlier about not taking yourself too seriously.
That's why I'm asking you, actually.
And it's hard. It's hard to maintain the balance between taking one's work very seriously, but not taking oneself seriously. So by that I mean that how I answer your question is that I do think that writers have great responsibility when it comes to their art. That our commitment should be to beauty and to truth, however we choose to define those things, beauty and truth. And if we are committed to those things in our work and not to the marketplace or to our vanities, then something great could possibly happen. Now, this becomes a little complicated when we speak about our readers, because what if our readers don't like our work? And for someone like me, who is a so-called minor writer, come with a minority community, oftentimes there's a sense of responsibility to the community. Like, am I representing the Vietnamese American community? That's a dangerous position to be in, because I think we should be aware of those things. There's an ethical, political responsibility, but at the same time, the greater obligation is to beauty and truth. I feel that if I'm writing about beauty and truth, about my community, whatever those are, not just Vietnamese Americans, but America as a whole, because I also think of myself as an American writer saying beautiful and truthful things about the United States. If we say those things, there will be Americans and there will be Vietnamese Americans. And if you are a Romanian writing about beauty and truth, there will be Romanians who will not like what you say. Because there are a very large number of readers out there who actually do not want the beauty and the truth. They want something else.
Why is that?
Well, because we're human. Because we all many of us, like to be flattered in our assumptions. Writers like to be flattered about being writers. We shouldn't allow that to happen. That's taking oneself too seriously. Readers, citizens, they want to be flattered about their worldviews. And literature should not be about flattering. Literature should be about beauty and truth. So there's a huge distinction there. So that's the writer's greater responsibility. And then the lesser responsibility is not to take oneself seriously. Again, take the work seriously, but not take oneself seriously. Because if I took myself seriously, then perhaps I would be saying, as you talked about earlier, I would call myself a voice for the voiceless. And that's a horrible thing to say, because I think about what the writer Arundhati Roy said. And she said, there really is no such thing as the voiceless. There are only the deliberately silenced and the preferably unheard. There's beauty and truth in what she says. And if you as a writer take those words seriously, then you know that no writer is a voice for the voiceless, because everybody has a voice. It's our societies that silence people. And my obligation as a writer is to illuminate those silences, but not to speak on behalf of anybody.
That's great. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for not taking this too seriously. Thank you for your books, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Liv. Thank you so much. Thank you to your audience and your readers.
Thank you so much.